This Sunday night, the most glamorous city in the entertainment world will throw itself a party. Red carpet, gowns, speeches. Conan O'Brien hosting the Oscars for the second year running at the Dolby Theatre on Hollywood Boulevard. Stars who've spent months being photographed and written about and breathlessly discussed will walk through that building and accept those little golden statues. And the whole spectacle will look exactly as it always has. Except for one thing. Not a single one of the 10 films nominated for Best Picture was made in Hollywood. Not one. Not in the city whose name those awards carry. The films being celebrated as the finest achievements in cinema were shot in New York, Louisiana, the United Kingdom, Brazil. Some post-production work trickled through Los Angeles. That was all they could get. And nobody in that theatre on Sunday night is going to say a word about it, because that is the kind of truth that powerful people in declining industries spend enormous energy not saying aloud. This video is about what is actually happening to Hollywood. Not the PR version, not the optimistic investor call version, not the version where every structural collapse is described as a transition. The real version. What has already been lost, why it happened, who is making money off the wreckage, and what it means for cinema, for culture, and for tens of thousands of people who built their lives around an industry that is coming apart in real time. The numbers alone are enough to stop you cold. In 2022, the Los Angeles area recorded 36,792 on-location shoot days. By 2025, that figure had fallen to 19,694. That is a reduction of nearly half in 3 years. Television production, which has historically been the backbone of Los Angeles employment in the entertainment sector, ended 2025 more than 50% below its 5-year average. TV drama production in the final quarter of last year was down 36% year-on-year. The former CEO of Sony Pictures Entertainment, a man named Michael Linton, visited Los Angeles recently and described what he found there. The sunny version of Detroit, he called it. It was crickets. There's nothing going on. When the former chief executive of one of the city's flagship studios compares his old town to the American city most associated with industrial collapse, that is not a rhetorical flourish. That is a verdict. To understand how Hollywood got here, you have to go back to where it started. Not the myth of it, not the version with searchlights and movie palaces and immortal stars, but the actual circumstances that built the thing in the first place. In the early part of the 20th century, filmmaking in America was a mess. Thomas Edison, who held patents on most of the technology required to make motion pictures, ran a trust that aggressively controlled the industry. Independent producers who refused to pay his fees faced lawsuits, equipment seizures, and sometimes physical intimidation. So they fled. They went as far from Edison's lawyers as they could, which meant going west. Southern California had year-round sunshine, cheap land, varied landscapes you could use as backdrops for almost anything, and no Edison. The filmmakers who relocated there weren't making a grand cultural statement. They were avoiding a bully. What they built, almost by accident, became one of the most powerful industrial ecosystems ever assembled. The Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter, who spent decades studying why certain industries concentrate in certain places, coined the term industry cluster in 1998 to describe a phenomenon where a critical mass of skilled people, specialized suppliers, and interconnected businesses in a single location creates competitive advantages no isolated company can match. He pointed to 2 places as the world's greatest examples: Silicon Valley and Hollywood. When the best cinematographers, the best editors, the best costume designers, the most experienced gaffers and sound mixers and set builders all live within 40 miles of each other, when they know each other, work with each other, mentor each other, compete against each other, The quality of the work that comes out of that system is genuinely difficult to replicate anywhere else. The Golden Age studios understood this. By the late 1920s and through the 1930s and 40s, MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox, and RKO weren't just making films. They were running vertically integrated empires that controlled production, distribution, and the very cinemas in which people watched the pictures. At their peak, these studios were collectively releasing more than 400 films a year. The major studios owned nearly every first-run theater in America. They had writers, directors, actors, costume designers, and composers, all on salary. Cary Grant worked for Columbia. Bette Davis belonged to Warner Brothers. The studio system was a factory, and for 2 decades it was the most culturally influential factory on Earth. That system died by antitrust in 1948, when the Supreme Court ruled that studios could no longer own the theaters that showed their films. But what replaced it? The more independent, director-driven Hollywood that produced Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather and Steven Spielberg's Jaws and Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver was still fundamentally rooted in the same geography, the same ecosystem of talent and knowledge and institutional memory that the cluster had built. The studios still sat in Los Angeles. The writers still lived in Burbank and Silver Lake. The crew still gathered at the same coffee shops and production offices and union halls where everyone who came before them had gathered. That continuity of knowledge is not a small thing. When a veteran editor teaches a younger editor on a set, or when a director of photography passes along a technique to their camera operator between setups, or when a showrunner mentors a staff writer through the experience of actually making television, that transfer of expertise is what keeps an industry's standards high. Strip it away and you get something qualitatively different from what came before. Jason Lazarchek arrived in Hollywood from New York in 2008, fresh out of college, and landed a job on a Lifetime show called Army Wives. It was not exactly where he'd imagined his career beginning, but in the pre-streaming era, that show ran 22 or 23 episodes a season, and writers stayed involved through the entire production process in case scripts needed changing on the fly. The showrunner was always there. The mentorship was constant. Lazarchek told Fortune that he learned more about writing and producing television during that period than most writers ever do in their careers. An eager young writer arriving in Los Angeles today would find none of that. The streaming era has no equivalent of the 8 o'clock on Wednesday night slot that needed filling every week. Platforms order a script, then wait 6 months before deciding whether to commission a second one. Shows have fewer episodes and fewer writers in the room. Writers are typically dismissed before production begins, removed from the very process their work was meant to serve. Lazarchek calls it a meager version of the screenwriter's previous job. He now works as a writing consultant for artificial intelligence companies, the same technology that the Writers' Union went on strike to get protections against in 2023. That strike, which ran for nearly 5 months, did real damage on top of damage that was already accumulating. But it was not the cause of what is happening to Hollywood. It was a symptom, evidence of how badly a workforce felt it had been treated by an industry that had grown structurally hostile to the people who actually make things. The real cause is a set of decisions and forces that have been building for 15 years, and the company most responsible for accelerating them sits not in Los Angeles, but in Los Gatos, in the heart of Silicon Valley. Netflix was founded in 1997 by Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph as a DVD-by-mail service. Hastings was a computer scientist and mathematician who had sold his previous company, Pure Software, to Rational Software in 1997 for $750 million. At the time, the largest acquisition in Silicon Valley history. He brought a technologist's mindset to the entertainment business, which meant he thought about it in terms of data, algorithms, and user behavior, rather than in terms of creative vision or cultural tradition. When Netflix began streaming in 2010, it entered a landscape still dominated by HBO, which was reaching subscribers through cable companies that kept a third of the subscription revenue. Netflix reached subscribers directly over the internet and kept everything. That structural advantage let it spend aggressively on content while building a subscriber base at a pace the legacy studios couldn't match. The more important advantage was data. When Netflix greenlit House of Cards in 2013 for $100 million, committing to 2 full seasons before a single frame was shot, the decision wasn't made by producers in a screening room responding to a creative pitch. It was made by an algorithm that had identified, from the viewing histories of millions of subscribers, that the intersection of David Fincher's existing audience, Kevin Spacey's existing audience, and the audience for political drama was large enough to justify the bet. The legacy studios had nothing equivalent. They were making decisions based on instinct, relationships, and box office history. Netflix was making them based on a data set that told it exactly what its audience was likely to watch before they'd watched it. Jeff Bewkes, who served as CEO of Time Warner and oversaw HBO, Warner Brothers, and Turner Broadcasting, has stated plainly that for 30 years, Hollywood's biggest business in terms of employment and profit was television series production rather than cinema. When Netflix turned television upside down, it didn't just change the business model for one revenue stream. It changed the business model for the industry. The competition that followed, Amazon Prime, Apple TV+, Disney+, HBO Max, Paramount+, all of them spending aggressively to establish streaming audiences, produced something that looked briefly like a golden age. More shows were being commissioned, more content was being created, and from 2019 to 2022, Hollywood's production numbers ticked upward as the new money flooded in. Then, the money stopped. The streamers, most of which had been burning through cash to acquire subscribers, looked at their balance sheets and pulled back hard. Disney Plus lost $4 billion in 2 years before pivoting toward profitability. Paramount Plus was never viable on its own. Warner Brothers Discovery arrived in 2022, carrying nearly $30 billion in debt from the merger that created it. The era of lavish streaming commissions ended abruptly, and what replaced it was a hiring freeze, a project slowdown, and a wave of cancellations that left thousands of film and TV workers without work. The production that did get made increasingly didn't get made in Los Angeles. Georgia, which has been offering film and television tax incentives since 2008, had already lured Marvel's entire franchise pipeline to Atlanta. Black Panther, Captain America, Civil War, dozens more. Louisiana, New Mexico, New Jersey, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Eastern Europe, Canada, all of them competing with California, all of them offering better financial terms for productions that no longer had any compelling reason to stay in a city where filming costs more, permitting takes longer, and the state's own incentive program was, until very recently, capped at a level that couldn't match what was available elsewhere. A veteran independent producer told Industry Trade Press that California's incentive structure is a joke, that the paperwork burden is so heavy and the process so lottery-like that it doesn't function as a genuine competitive tool. In the first quarter of 2025, television production in Greater Los Angeles fell 30.5% year-on-year. Feature film production fell 28.9%. Those are not rounding errors, those are structural declines. Now come to the deal that defines where everything is going. In November 2025, Ted Sarandos, the co-CEO of Netflix, a man who grew up working in video rental stores in Phoenix, Arizona, and joined Netflix in 2000 when it was still primarily a DVD service, personally visited the White House to lobby Donald Trump on what he hoped would be the defining transaction of his career. Netflix had been quietly pursuing an $82.7 billion bid for the studio and streaming assets of Warner Bros. Discovery, which had come to market after its parent company decided to break itself apart. The deal would have put HBO, the Warner Brothers, film library, the Harry Potter franchise, Batman, and 60 years of the most prestigious television in American history under the Netflix umbrella. Sarandos spent the better part of 3 months working Washington, meeting Trump administration officials, testifying before Senate subcommittees, making the case that Netflix was not a monopoly, but simply the best-run company in a very crowded market. On February 26, 2026, Warner Bros. Discovery's board accepted a rival bid, a hostile all-cash offer of $111 billion from David Ellison's Paramount Skydance, which had acquired control of Paramount Pictures the previous August. Netflix walked away, pocketed a $2.8 billion breakup fee, and its stock went up. The market was telling you something important there. It was saying that Wall Street believed Netflix had been right to bid, right to try, and right to leave before it overpaid. Netflix, which has 325 million subscribers and a market value that exceeded $400 billion heading into 2026, had already won. The traditional studios were fighting over the ruins. David Ellison is 39 years old and is the son of Larry Ellison, the Oracle co-founder who ranks among the 10 richest people on Earth, and who is, among other things, a major donor to Donald Trump. David Ellison's path into Hollywood ran through his father's money and his own genuine love of film. He once trained at a stunt school in London and has described wanting to be a filmmaker since childhood. He produced Top Gun, Maverick, which was a genuine hit, and has spent years building Skydance into a company that makes films in partnership with major studios. He now controls Paramount and, pending regulatory approval, will control Warner Bros. Discovery as well, a combined entity that will contain CBS, CNN, HBO, the Warner Bros. Film Library, Paramount Plus, HBO Max, Nickelodeon, BET, and a back catalogue stretching across a century of American popular culture. He has promised to find $6 billion in cost savings from this merger. His precise words to the approximately 460 Warner Bros. Discovery executives who attended a recent town hall, some in person at the Stephen J. Ross Theatre on the Burbank lot, hundreds more via video conference, were that the majority of the cost efficiencies would come from non-labor sources. The industry heard that and understood it the way everyone always understands corporate cost-saving language. It means job cuts. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters, which represents nearly 15,000 motion picture Teamsters, has already filed a detailed report with the Department of Justice, urging it to block the deal unless enforceable protections for domestic production and labor standards are included. Deadline Hollywood reports that the belief around town is that the savings would be mostly job cuts. Here is what the Oscars field tells you about where production actually lives now. Sinners, directed by Ryan Coogler and starring Michael B. Jordan in 2 separate roles, was filmed in Louisiana. Coogler, a Californian who made Fruitvale Station and Black Panther and is one of the genuinely exciting filmmakers working today, went south because that is where it made financial and logistical sense to shoot a period film in the Jim Crow South. Hamnet, directed by Chloe Zhao of Nomadland, was filmed in the United Kingdom, where the adaptation of Maggie O'Farrell's novel about the death of Shakespeare's son belongs. Marty Supreme, starring Timothée Chalamet, was shot in New York. The Secret Agent, a Brazilian film directed by Kleber Mendonça Filho about a professor adrift in 1977 Recife, wasn't made in America at all. It's there because the Academy, which once struggled to acknowledge non-English language films, now routinely nominates cinema from outside the American system. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein and the Richard Linklater film Blue Moon both streamed on Netflix or were distributed by tech-backed platforms. Not one of these 10 films needed Hollywood to exist, and none of them chose it. What that means isn't simply that the Best Picture race has become more international, though it has. It means the cluster is breaking. The upward spiral Michael Porter described, where concentration of talent and industry creates advantages that draw more talent and industry, has gone into reverse. When productions go to Georgia, the lighting technicians in Georgia get more experienced. When shows are produced in Vancouver, the editors in Vancouver build up knowledge that was once the exclusive province of Los Angeles. When a director of photography makes 5 consecutive films in Eastern Europe, their working relationships become Eastern European. The relationships that held the Los Angeles ecosystem together were built over decades of proximity. They cannot be maintained at a distance, and once they fray past a certain point, they don't come back. Jeff Bewkes, who ran Time Warner for 11 years before it was acquired and dismantled, described the situation with the clarity of someone who has nothing left to protect. "The most powerful people controlling the media now," he said, "and determining its future, are the tech oligarchs." That's not a prediction. It's a description of what's happening now. The man who oversaw HBO, the most artistically prestigious broadcasting operation in American television history, is looking at the current landscape and seeing not a transition, but a transfer of power. The people who now decide what gets made, where it gets made, how much it costs, and whether anyone who made it ever gets paid again, based on how well it performed, are not filmmakers. They are not showrunners or studio executives who came up through development and have a feel for what works. They are engineers and data scientists and investors whose careers have been about optimizing systems, not about making art. Ted Sarandos said something at an industry summit last April that should be tattooed somewhere in the lobby of every cinema in the world. Asked whether theatrical moviegoing still mattered, he called it an outmoded idea for most people. He then asked rhetorically what consumers were trying to tell the industry through declining box office attendance, and answered his own question: that they'd like to watch movies at home. He is probably right about the direction of travel. He is almost certainly right that data supports that reading of consumer behavior. What the data cannot tell him, and what no algorithm has yet been built to capture, is what is lost when a film is experienced alone on a sofa, rather than in a dark room, with strangers who laugh and gasp and go quiet at the same moments you do. That collective experience has been part of how human beings process stories for as long as there have been stories. Netflix didn't destroy it, but it has definitively deprioritized it, and in an industry now run by people who measure success in completion rates and rewatch behavior, deprioritized very quickly becomes gone. The numbers that nobody wants to look at directly are the workforce numbers. From 2022 to 2024, 41,000 workers who keep the entertainment industry functioning, not the stars, not the executives, but the crew members, the technicians, the editors, and sound mixers, and production coordinators, and set painters, and wardrobe assistants who actually make film and television, left the industry. Some left because they had no choice. Others chose to leave because they could see what was coming and didn't want to wait for it to arrive. The city of Los Angeles has begun noticing empty commercial property where production companies used to be. The Teamsters are at the Department of Justice. California's Governor Gavin Newsom pushed through an expansion of the state's film and television tax credit program to $750 million annually, a number that represents a genuine effort to compete, but that arrived late, is being distributed slowly, and cannot single-handedly reverse a structural shift that has been building for a decade. And above all this, before any human decision-maker in the next 10 years has to grapple with any of these problems, there is the question of artificial intelligence, which is already reshaping what gets made and who gets paid to make it. The very writer who stood on a picket line outside the Disney lot in 2023, refusing to help AI companies because he understood the threat they posed to his livelihood. Jason Lazarchek, the Army Wives writer, the man who said he had never found it harder to earn a living in Hollywood, is now working as a writing consultant for those same AI companies because he needed the money. That sentence contains the entire story. The transition is not theoretical. It is happening to real people who have real mortgages and real skills that took real years to develop. And the industry that employed them is telling them to adapt or leave, while simultaneously closing off the paths by which anyone used to adapt. What the Oscars will not say on Sunday night, what no speech will acknowledge, what the applause and the beautiful clothes and the genuinely excellent films being honored will politely obscure, is that the institution performing the ceremony is celebrating cinema made everywhere but the city whose name it bears. That is not a tragedy in the abstract sense. There are specific people who lost specific careers because of specific decisions made by specific companies. There is a young writer somewhere in the Los Angeles area right now who was told 2 years ago that there was no room for them in the writer's room of a show that has 4 episodes instead of 22, and is working a job they didn't train for because the industry they came here to join no longer has a place for them at the level of entry they need. There is a gaffer who spent 20 years building a reputation for a particular kind of lighting work on studio productions and is now available for hire in Bulgaria because that's where the work went. There are hundreds of small businesses in Los Angeles, catering companies, equipment rental houses, costume shops, that exist to serve productions that are no longer being shot there. Michael Porter pointed to 2 industry clusters as the best in the world: Silicon Valley and Hollywood. One of them is eating the other. The Oscars will be handed out by YouTube in 2029 when the ceremony leaves ABC after 50 years on that network. Not NBC, not CBS, not a television network at all. Google's video platform. And the chances are strong that a meaningful portion of the audience will encounter the ceremony not as a broadcast, but as a series of clips that circulate through the same social media feeds where teenagers already spend more time watching user-generated content than anything Hollywood has ever produced. The platform has consumed the content. The cluster has lost its gravity. And on Sunday night, in a theater on Hollywood Boulevard, 10 films made everywhere else in the world will compete for the most famous award in the industry, and the cameras will carefully frame every shot so you can see the chandelier and the lights and the gold statues and the stars. And nothing in that building will tell you what the nominees themselves already know. That the place this ceremony was built to celebrate is no longer where the work is being done. That is the thing about a death spiral. It doesn't announce itself. It looks, from the inside, like a party,